Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am very excited about this video today. I have been meaning to film this for several months, and that is an updated version of my top 5 neutral eyeshadow palettes. I think I have done a video like this a couple of years ago, but I feel like it's a little bit more important now because I have become much more obsessed with neutral palettes lately. I'm kind of like on a one track when it comes to my eyeshadows. I don't stray very much, but my neutral palettes get a lot of love from me. And today I've narrowed it down to my top 5, the ones that I use the most, the ones that I think are the best and the most versatile in a way when we're talking about just neutrals. So we're going to rank them and go through them all today. I hope you guys are excited about this one. I know I've hinted at some of these palettes before, but I think there might be a few surprises in here for some of you. I can't wait to share them with you, but before we get into the palettes, I want to give a special welcome to any of my new visitors here. Welcome to my channel. Please consider subscribing and make sure that your notifications are turned on. With that said, let's jump right into it. All right, so I've got them here in front of me. We're gonna do these in order, but that said, these are all top 5. So I mean, these are all really good. The difference between them is subtle. Also, the stipulation that I put on these is everything had to have more than 6 pans inside. So some of my smaller neutral palettes didn't qualify for this ranking. So let's start with number 5. Ranked as my number 5 neutral palette, I am going with the Lawless Dreamy Dozen palette. This is truly a perfectly done neutral eyeshadow palette. It looks kind of basic. It does remind me, and I think I've said this a couple of times before, it reminds me just a little bit of the Tartelette in Bloom, but I feel like the versatility of this one is even better than the Tartelette in Bloom one. Fantastic quality, especially these darker mattes right here. When you put those on your eyelid with really any blending brush, something just nice and fluffy, you literally can swirl it 3 times and it's perfectly blended. It's intense, it's rich, but it's buildable. It's the easiest eyeshadow formula, especially the mattes, that I think I don't know if I should say I've ever worked with. That's kind of a tall claim, but it is definitely up there. There are only 3 shimmers inside here, but they're perfectly done shimmers. You have kind of like a silvery taupe that's more of like a mid-tone shimmer, a really nice light champagne, and then this beautiful kind of golden peachy champagne shell peach. It's so nice. I love that you get a warm row, a neutral row, and then a cooler toned row, but you definitely can mix and match. Just such a good one. Let me know if you guys have tried out the newer Lawless palette. I know they have a more berry toned version that I've been meaning to pick up since back in the fall, and I still haven't done it yet. I probably should, because I do love the Lawless formula, and as I've kind of pulled this out more recently, as I've been trying to prepare for this video, I feel even more compelled to maybe pick up that one. So if you guys have opinions on that, let me know down below. Okay, let's go to my number 4 ranked palette. For that, I'm going with a drugstore palette, and it is from ColourPop. This is the ColourPop Fill in Bubbly palette. There's something about this palette that just seems to really speak to me in a way that I don't feel like many other people get. I've talked about it a lot before. There was a moment there about 2 years ago that I just was raving about this thing like crazy. And I do know that some of you didn't like it very much because you thought it was a little bit too warm. It's definitely on the warmer side. I don't think this is like too warm for me. They're kind of more like peachy warm tones, which aren't too orange on me. Anytime I think of something warm that would be more of a turnoff for me, I think of more of those orange tones that are a little bit more vibrant and bold and maybe not so universally flattering. But that said, I know there are people that don't like warm tones. This is like a neutral leaning warm palette. But you guys, even when I was swatching this today for this video, especially the shimmers in this palette, there is something about these shimmers that ColourPop added something to it. Maybe I just got an exceptionally good batch or something, because it is so good. As I was swatching these for this video today, I once again was just like, oh my gosh, these shimmers are insane. They're stunning. Every single one of these is just amazing. But let me just show you guys this shade right here in the corner. This is called Pop Off. I mean, holy smokes. This is just, look at that. It's like liquefied metal. I mean, this even makes Sydney Grace look a little bit shy. It's insane. Holy smokes. It's nice and feels almost creamy. It's not a cream formula, but it's just so rich and buttery. It goes on like a dream. And if you put this on with a brush, you'll get a little bit more of a subtle look. So I know that's quite punchy and intense, but man, you guys, I love this palette so much. It is so good. It creates some of the prettiest eye looks. This is one I often take when I'm traveling, especially for like maybe like a party or a dinner or something where I want to look nice. This is one of the palettes that I will take with me. I mean, I will often think of this palette over some of my small like Natasha Denona palettes. It's that good. Okay, ranked at number 3. This is a newer palette to my my collection. I've added this in the last, I think it's been about a year now, and it is from Sydney Grace. This is the Sydney Grace Unveiled palette. This was done in collaboration with, I think her name was Kendra Mathis. Yes, Kendra Mathis. She is a bridal makeup artist, and it is such a well-curated palette. The only complaint that I have with this one, although even as I talk myself through this complaint, I don't really have a resolution for it because I don't know which shade I would kick out. But basically my complaint is this: there are only 2 lid shimmers in here, and it's not that I necessarily need more than those 2 shades, but I just love Sydney Grace's lid shimmers. Like, more than anything, her lid shimmers are the best that there is. So I wish there were more in here, but that said, I don't know which of these mattes I would kick out because they're all so perfectly done. So basically the idea with this palette is there are 3 of her most requested looks from brides. You have a kind of neutral pink look, a soft pink look, a warmer kind of bronzy look, and then kind of a cool muted smoky look with this row right here. And I love that. You definitely can kind of mix things up a little bit, which I often like to do, especially if I'm going for cool tones. I usually like to throw something a little bit warm in my crease just to kind of balance the look out a little bit so it's not strictly cool toned or gray. But this is so good. Her formulas are so amazing. This pink right here, I don't know if this will show up in the swatch that I did for you guys very well, but it is like a foil. I mean, kind of like this ColourPop one. I don't know that it's quite as like creamy as the ColourPop one, but I mean, it is just truly so foiled and rich and metallic. It's the most beautiful soft pink shimmery color. By the way, I did use this palette on my daughter-in-law for her wedding, and it worked amazing. It is the perfect wedding day palette, but it's certainly a good neutral palette. These are looks that you could do for every day, and I love that you can darken things up or smoke things out with all of these rich tones out here. Or if you want to go for something more soft and everyday, you can just kind of stick with this side of the palette. It's fantastic. Very underrated. I feel like Sydney Grace, I mean, I just got done talking about Sydney Grace and I think my last video, very underrated. Her palettes are so good, and this one is exceptional, especially if you're into your neutrals that have a couple of different variations. But even better than that palette is my number 2 palette, which is also from Sydney Grace, and this is also one that is relatively new to me and is slowly climbing up and up and up in the rankings of like my all-time favorite palettes. It's the Love's Journey palette. This is stunning. Now, I always look at this and I see the pink flowers and the word love, and I think there's gonna be pinks inside here. There are no pinks inside here. It's basically a strictly neutral palette. You get kind of your softer, I wouldn't say they're super warm. This is the only shade in here that pulls warm on me. Everything else pulls very neutral or kind of cooler or even gray. Oh, but the shimmers in this palette. The reason I like this one a little bit better than the Unveiled is you get so many incredible shimmers. All 3 of these are just fantastic. These 3 are all so stunning. I am wearing this palette on my eyes today. I have this, I want to call it green, but it's a very muted kind of taupey green, almost like a cool gold, which doesn't really make sense, but I don't know, you'd have to see this to understand what I'm talking about, and I don't know that's coming across in my lights. It's a very interesting color. It's kind of like a greeny pewter, has a little bit of bronze in it, the tiniest hint of a green. It's really interesting. The shimmer, I mean, Sydney Grace shimmers, I know I say it every time, I can't help myself. It is the best. It is so good. If you like a metallic formula, her metallic formula never disappoints. It is so fantastic. But once again, I just love the tones inside here. I love these. This transition shade and this one right here are the perfect transition shades. This one's a little more of like it has like a pinky, a dusty rose kind of pink tone to it, but it's definitely not pink. It just has like a tinge of pink in it. And then this one's much more of like a muted kind of cool tone, kind of like the color of my shirt, but a little bit darker. And then of course this row down here is all gray, but these grays are beautiful. They almost pull a little bit purpley, kind of soft lavender on me, which makes for a really pretty look if you're into that kind of like gray, silvery gray, kind of ethereal, wintry look. They're so pretty. Don't underestimate this row. It looks like these might be transition shades for you, but that's one thing that I've noticed with Sydney Grace matte shadows, generally speaking. In the pan, they always look kind of blah and soft, like they're not gonna be that dark, but like these go on way darker on the outer corner. Most of what I'm wearing in my outer corner today, with the exception of right at the lash line, like all this depth that you're seeing right here, doesn't come from this shade, it comes from this shade right here, which you wouldn't think that, right? It looks kind of light, but it's good to be aware of that when you're going into a Sydney Grace palette for the first time, because you might look at this and think, oh, I'm going to throw that in my crease initially and it's going to be way too dark, and then that might make you think that you don't like the palette. Give it a little bit of time, play around with the shades to kind of get a feel for how they apply. But once you kind of figure that out, I mean, you just can't beat this. This is such a great color story. This is such a perfectly done palette. I absolutely love it. And that leaves me with my number one. Now, there is a chance that someday this palette could overtake my number one, but I certainly wasn't prepared to let that happen today, because my next palette is the most perfect palette ever, and it's the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. I bet you guys didn't see that one coming. This palette is so amazing. By the way, if the high price tag of this one, these are $69. If that price tag is way too high for you, Alter Ego does make a really good dupe for this palette. It's called the Daylight palette, so I will link that one down below for you guys as well. I always want to mention it because I have tested them out side by side several times, and I think that one is almost as good as this one quality wise, and the color story is pretty much identical. But this palette is absolute perfection. It's just the most perfect color story. If you are someone that doesn't like anything too warm or anything too pink or anything too gray or cool, this is like a combination of all of those things. If you like mix them together, you get like a hint of pink, but it goes on much more dusty than anything too bold if you're a little bit scared of color. But it's not boring by any means. It's very, very feminine and pretty. You get some like cool tones in here, but they're not too gray or ashy if you just don't want to go that direction. You have some muted taupes and browns in here, and the shimmers in this palette, you guys, more than anything, the colors and formulas of the shimmers in here are unlike anything else. And I will say this, as I was swatching this palette, and I think this every time I swatch this palette as opposed to when I use it, there's something about some of these glitter toppers and some of these softer kind of muted but very sparkly shimmers that don't come across as well in a swatch as they do on your eyes. They're much more impressive on your eyes or when you see them in person. So if you are someone that has been interested in this palette and maybe looking at swatches, you think, that just doesn't look all that great, I would recommend, if you can, go into a Sephora and try and find this somewhere and live swatch some of those shades so you can see how unique some of those formulas are. But I love that about Natasha Denona. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my Sydney Grace metallics, but everything in here is the same formula. They're all just like really foiled metallics that are beautiful. Don't get me wrong, I love them, but there are a lot of different formulas in here. Some are a little bit more rich and intense and metallic. Others have a lot of tiny microfine glitter particles in them. They're good as like lid toppers. So much variety, not just with the colors, but with the formulas as well. I love Natasha Denona. I know it annoys some of you that this once formerly like all cheap drugstore makeup girl has been suckered into buying all these Natasha Denona palettes. But I can't help it. Once you've been doing YouTube for seven and a half years, at some point I feel like you just get, you get suckered into something, and this is, Natasha Denona is definitely one of my weaknesses, and this is by far her very best palette. It's amazing. But that is it, you guys. Those are all of my top 5 neutral eyeshadow palettes. These are what I consider to be the best of the best. I've tried out a lot over the years. I still have a ton that I love. I mean, it's hard to see. I have my little eyeshadow shelf sitting right next to me, and there's so many palettes that I love that are calling out to me. But when push comes to shove and I really have to make some decisions, these are the ones that I use the most, I recommend the most, that perform the best. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you have neutral palettes that you would like to add to my list, please share those down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me give you one last reminder to subscribe before you leave, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.